use of microcomputers in libraries, particularly in public areas. And starting in the 1990s and going into the 2000s and the 2010s, there has been an accelerating shift from paper to electronic full text, books and magazines or journals. And starting in 2006, libraries began offering services in virtual worlds such as Second Life. I'm going to take a look back at libraries in Second Life because what happened is extremely instructive and helps us understand what might happen in the future with social VR. Second Life, launched in 2003, is still the most commercially successful and popular virtual world to date, still, after 16 years. It has approximately 600,000 regular monthly users, that is, people who sign in at least once a month. And the last time I saw an estimate, in 2015, Second Life had an estimated GDP of $500 million, which is more than many small countries. However, there were problems. In 2007 to 2009, the libraries basically tripped onto Second Life as a new means of providing service to their users. It was very popular for a while there. But the 2007 to 2009 economic downturn impacted many libraries' budgets, and that meant scaling back on outreach projects. Costs associated with SL, such as virtual land, known as SIMs, staff training, and the creation and curation of information resources. If you had something that was in paper format, but you wanted to make it available through Second Life, you had to convert it to electronic, and that usually involved a fair bit of work, depending on the resource. At a time of tightening budgets, virtual worlds were seen as a frill that very few institutions could afford. To boot, Linden Lab suddenly and unexpectedly discontinued the nonprofit and educational discount of 50% in 2011. And they did this without really consulting with the educational institutions first. Most educational institutions need to know a year in advance what their budgets are because they have to submit them for approval. Linden Lab went and cut the educational discount, essentially doubling the cost of maintaining a SIM, which means that many nonprofits, libraries, and educational institutions landed up leaving Second Life. Linden Lab did reestablish that educational discount 3 years later, but the damage was done and very few institutions bothered to come back. Okay, so what were some of the problems that we learned from providing library services in Second Life? Well, virtual library services were not terribly heavily used by Second Life avatars. Most people in Second Life were there to do things other than browse and use libraries and ask reference questions. There was a fundamental mismatch between two groups of users: Second Life users and libraries patrons, and the two did not necessarily overlap. Another problem was the steep learning curve. People who were most likely to use library services were unlikely to download and install the Second Life client software and then spend 30 to 60 minutes learning how to navigate, learning how to teleport, simply to ask a simple reference question or to read an ebook. In other words, the cost of admission was just too high. So, after an initial burst of enthusiasm, there were a lot of articles written in scholarly journals about libraries using Second Life, and a couple of books. The setting up of many academic, public, and special libraries in Second Life. Almost all of these services eventually shut down within a couple of years. There simply wasn't the money or the time to expand library services to platforms where there was still too steep a learning curve to participate and still too small an audience, especially when compared to the estimated 2.5 billion people on social media, such as Facebook. Now I'm going to talk to you about VR, but I'm not talking to you about VR, meaning virtual reality. When I'm in a group of librarians, when I say VR, most of them already understand that what I am talking about is virtual reference. Many academic, public, and special libraries already offer virtual reference services to their users. Virtual reference is a reference service initiated electronically, often in real time. Patrons use computers or mobile devices to communicate with the reference staff at the library without actually being physically present. Communication channels that are frequently used in virtual reference include such tools as chat, video conferencing, voice over IP, co-browsing, which means you're sharing a web page browser with another patron, email, and instant messaging or chat. These virtual reference services are usually answered by librarians in the reference department at a library, or sometimes by the participants of a collaborative reference system serving more than one institution, such as a library consortium. Libraries are big about consortiums and working with other institutions and other libraries. So, my vision for the future, which I will lay out for you now, is that I can foresee a future where many libraries would offer virtual reference services to users via virtual reality. In other words, VR in VR. Okay? Users could make appointments for their avatar to meet in world with a reference librarian like me, who would assist them in finding electronic and printed information resources to answer their questions and meet their needs. Alternatively, and this is something we did in Second Life, library staff could sit at the virtual reference desk at regularly scheduled shifts, available to whoever popped in with a question or a query. Come on. I'm having trouble pulling up my next slide. Oh, I know why. Just give me a second. I need to reorient myself. Okay, sorry about that. Technical difficulties. Using virtual reality for virtual reference. The reference interview would encompass both text chat and voice chat and include hand gestures, body language, and even facial expressions, nonverbal cues, just as in real-life conversations. Academic, public, and special libraries could even work together to create a collaborative 24/7 reference service which spans the globe. So what I propose is that varying existing academic, school, and public library consortia join forces and share assets to provide a collaborative 24/7 reference service which spans the globe and has locations on many popular social VR platforms, expanding to new platforms as they become available. However, there are many obstacles to implementation of this vision that I just presented to you. I am now going to spend a few minutes talking about these obstacles as well as some potential solutions to them. One, first obstacle, choosing which platforms on which you will provide a library's virtual reference service. Now, one option is to use an existing social VR platform. The advantage is that you don't need to start building a platform from scratch. You can leverage off of existing work. However, one of the biggest disadvantages right now, and we have seen this in the last few months, is vendor instability. For example, High Fidelity shut down completely in January 2020. Linden Lab has now, in 2 successive layoffs, laid off 70 staff working on Sansar, and they are essentially suspending work on the project, although it is still up and running at this moment. One possible solution: libraries have to deal with this sort of uncertainty with computer vendors all the time. You will remember that we have long used mini computer-based or microcomputer-based library management software, and we have always had to evaluate vendors in terms of their stability and financial success. So we will be using that knowledge that we've picked up working with other types of software to evaluate and assess which platforms would be the best fit for a virtual reference service. Another possible solution: in the case of High Fidelity, the code is all open sourced, and it is now being worked on in 3 forks or copies of the software that are being worked on as a sort of a next generation High Fidelity. So we might see an open source distributed solution similar to the way that the websites that we now run are all open source and distributed. Second, or rather third point on the slide, we will probably land up providing services on multiple social VR platforms just as a way to cover the bases. That way, if any one of them does come down, we still can provide service. But as you can see, choosing a platform is a very important first step. Another serious obstacle is copyright and licensing issues. As a University of Manitoba librarian, our university signs licensing agreements with commercial database providers which restrict access to that content to people who are University of Manitoba faculty, staff, and students only. What that means is, if I were to provide reference services to a user not affiliated with my institution, I would not be able to provide them with copies of books and journal articles, even if they were easy to transmit. That is, electronically. This is a serious problem. And the fact remains that if you're going to try and provide a broad-based virtual reality-based virtual reference service, you do need to look very carefully at copyright and licensing issues for the information that you are sharing. A possible solution here is to refer users to useful public resources such as Google Scholar, which anybody can use. Another possible solution is that you would refer users to the information resources in their local public and academic libraries. And an example of a useful tool for this is WorldCat, which is a global catalog of library catalogs that you can search, and it will pull up a list of books in that user's area.